Today I want to review the concurrent episode of South Park Unfulfilled. And I do think that as an episode, I have some complaints about it, and I also think it's a really good episode. That I want to start off with my complaints about it. That I really think that there is something called a South Park formula where it is the same type of taking something from television, building up characters in a zany way, and then do stuff to make it feel like a thriller and stuff. So I really think that, and they're also doing a lot of Easter eggs and references to other episodes. So I really think South Park has kind of created a formula to a point where it is becoming a little noticeable and lacking some originality. That being said, I really think that this is another very strong and very allegorical and very cerebral episode of South Park, and I like this direction. And it's ultimately about Butter's father, who is working for the Amazon company and a bike parade, and how that affects the town of South Park. So it starts out with Butters telling his dad about the bike parade and that the top prize is $50, and his dad kind of flips out at Butters, and Butters still has his smile and all that after his dad's like, fuck you and stuff. So I think it's kind of interesting how Butters kind of has that attitude. And unlike Meg Griffin, he has a lot more sophistication. Like, they kind of show that Butters, he recognizes that his parents are dicks and all that. So I think that was a good opening episode, but I also think that it's also interesting how it kind of relates to our parents' generation and the concurrent generation, where like how parents can be very verbally abusive and how sometimes children can be a lot more nicer and patient, millennial versus the baby boomers. And in the next scene, it's revealed that that Butters' father works for Amazon. So they're playing the song "I Sold My Soul to the Company Store." So it was a long montage with that entire song, and I believe Johnny Cash was singing it, but it drags on for a long time. The lyrics are very, very monotonous. So, "I sold my soul to the company store." It goes on for a long time, and there's a lot of Dutch angles. There's a lot of speed up shots. There's a lot of montage shots. There's a lot of cutting on action shots and editing. So all my editing people, you should really be watching this. So it is kind of showing, and it's also making a point through the lyrics about how monotonous it is and how there is a huge sense of people feeling trapped because they cannot, feeling like automatrons because they're not making enough money to get out of a job like that, and also they are buying things from Amazon. And people say that's true about companies. If you, like, for example, I used to work at Stop and Shop. So, because they don't pay a lot, you can only buy food from that store. And people who work at Family Dollar do the same thing. And people who work at Save A Lot and other places, like, sometimes you can't get out of putting money back into the place you work at. So it's almost like you're working at the company and you're basically getting all your needs, and you're working for that company too. So it's a cycle of give and take, but also a cycle of being like an automatron. Almost just like how a car, imagine if you were like a car and all that, somebody's driving you, but in the end they're also the only thing that's giving you stuff that you need to live, either products or fuel or whatever. Fuel in the forms of products and food. So I think that's really important to show that. And I also will say that another thing that I kind of liked is that during all the striking, that they kind of made it almost like that the adults in South Park, they were kind of almost like an Irish mob or something like that, because there's a lot of movies that have been created about the late 1800s where there are a lot of union riots and a lot of employee riots, because people like Andrew Carnegie were making like $500 million, and they only paid people like 12 cents or 13 cents a week, I believe. or like not even $1 a week for over 40 hours of work. And if people died and whatever on the job, who gave a fuck and all that. So I really liked how they kind of reference, what was going on over 100 years ago, and how people should kind of revolt against the system. So I liked that. And the other thing that I kind of liked is that I think his name is Josh or something like that. He's a character in South Park. He's like a manager at the Amazon store, like Butter's dad's boss. So what happens was he gets pushed by a like conveyor machine, and then he gets thrown on a conveyor belt, and then he kind of is dismembered, and his body is stuck in a box and all that. So they're trying to like save him by pressing a button to turn the machines off and all that. So it was kind of interesting because it almost felt like when he was like getting wrapped into a package, that the machines almost like had a mind of their own and stuff. And I think what they're also saying is how that all the machines within that building kind of have a mind of their own, or they're trying to work along with people. So the employees get blamed for the machine, and also how it's also a statement about technology and all that, like how sometimes technology can be so advanced that it can put other people in danger and stuff, or that people think that new technology or machines operating on a certain reaction to whatever, it still puts people in danger. But also the other thing too is that the employees were slandered because the machines, did damage to the boss and stuff. So that's kind of what sparks the strike in the store. So that's all kind of about like Butter's dad character. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the president of Amazon, and also the mayor of South Park. Like the mayor of South Park, I think she's a really good character, but she's probably the most underutilized character that has a lot of stories. And one thing that I liked about her, there's an Easter egg. There's a picture of her in the mayor's office posing with someone that looks like Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice in a photograph. And one thing I liked about that is they're kind of almost like saying that maybe the mayor is supposed to be an allegory to George Bush Jr. George Bush Sr. died, so maybe that's kind of why they did that, but also kind of how that the economy got very fucked up, and the reason why all these jobs and people kind of got into these jobs and crappy stores was because of George W. Bush. His actions led to the 2008 financial crisis. But so, it's interesting to have the mayor do that and then kind of figure that the way to solve the problem in the striking is to look at like the president of Amazon is doing something like saying, if you don't solve this problem, Mayor South Park, I'm taking away your Prime membership. So the mayor's kind of on the side of protecting her own investment, just like how George W. Bush cared about his own money and cared about looking out for himself. He's looking out for the company. He's not looking out for the people. And so I think she's a really good allegory for George W. Bush, and also kind of an allegory for politicians, and how in the end of the day, they're helping the people with the money, the people who kind of have more, the people who kind of control them. And also the president of Amazon, it's kind of interesting. He has like telepathy. He can read minds and stuff. So it's interesting because he reminds me of Mewtwo from Pokemon, the movie, where, Mewtwo was this intimidating figure that always was in a lot of shots where he was either above people or levitating above people. And the president of Amazon in this, it was the same thing where he kind of was like tall and striking and very intimidating with his eyes and stuff, almost like the fucking Undertaker. And he was bald with a lot of like, nerves pulsing on his head. So he looked a bit like a stereotypical Martian. But also he kind of had like a baby look to his face. When a newborn baby. So it can honestly be like an idea of how he looks kind of appealing or charming, or, something to draw you in because he looks a little bit like a baby and stuff. So, and that's kind of presidents of companies and all that. They sell their look. You look at Donald Trump. And then you see the nerves pulsating on his head, so you obviously have a look of this person is dangerous, this person's a monster, this person is intimidating. You look at his intelligence and how he wants to psychoanalyze people. So it's a sense of he's not looking at, as he said through telepathy with an episode of South Park, Amazon's successful because they care about the customers only. So, and that's how companies are, where they don't care about people. And there's been like talks about like how they say companies teach their bosses to be sociopathic. You know, who gives a fuck about the employee? They're costing me fucking money. Fuck the employee. That type of detrimental attitude, and that's very prominent in the United States. Other countries are a little bit more caring about the employee, but fucking over the employee and being a facade for the customers is how most companies operate. So, you know, again, back to the president of Amazon within this episode, that type of sociopathic demeanor. And the last thing about him is it's really interesting because he does kind of a bit of a baby face on the front, but on the back of his head, it looks like an ass. It looks like ass cheeks or testicles. And if you remember that episode of South Park with the ass-faced people, and they were to be Brad Pitt's parents, I believe, like the ass-faced people. The back of his head again looks a lot like an ass or sagging testicles. And we obviously know South Park does stuff like this. So, you know, it's also the third part of what a boss or a corporate person is. You know, as I said, they have a baby look, they're charming, they have a Martian type of look, so they're a bit of an alien to their people, to their employees. They're intimidating, they're dangerous, they're sociopathic, they have a cruelty to them. And then the last part is that in the end of the day, that they're just a dick. And like the president of Amazon, you know, if he doesn't treat his employees well, if he does all these things to kind of intimidate politicians to get what he wants, to care about his business and not care about the good of his employees, these people are dicks, you know. Again, with Andrew Carnegie, you know, the man had $500 million in the 1800s. He was the richest person that ever lived by inflation. Possibly. But because he paid people cents on the hour and people died, children died in his factory, he's a fucking dick, and he's definitely in Dante's Inferno or hell or whatever you believe in. So, being a dick is the last thing, and I think they did his character very well. So, you know, there is a humor, there's a satirical humor to it, but also a sense of just knowing that this guy's a dick. And the last thing is I want to talk about the children of South Park. And a lot of the characters, like, because they want to pull off a bike parade, so it's also talking about like how frivolous a town can be, because even the adults are like, you know, they feel guilty about striking. They want to become scabs a bit because they want to kind of buy crap for kids to put on their bicycles for a bicycle parade. And the kids care about doing a bicycle parade because everybody's kind of doing it. So it is a sense of that idea of, you know, you look at the holidays, you know, majority of people think it's a time to buy presents or shit for themselves. You look at how everybody has an iPhone, people follow fads. You look at Pokemon, you know, in the 90s where people were buying Pokemon cards. People are buying, like, Let's Go Eevee, you know, blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of blood went into that. You look at clothes, you look at trend, you look at like Beyonce stuff and other people's stuff where, you know, people say that's made in sweatshops and stuff, that in the sense we can get so distracted about a want or what we like to have or a convenience or addicted to a convenience and not see the blood that went into that and the suffering that went in to get that there. And, you know, you look at kids and all that, and kids have that naivety because they're not experienced in the real world and they don't see that. So the bike parade can be a good kind of message to that. That they're so, it's like a dimension between adult and a child, because children nowadays are very, like the stereotype of millennial children is that, you know, they're very pampered by adults. You know, their parents are more of their friends. Their parents kind of give them a little bit too much of what they want. Their parents are a little afraid to be tough on them. And a lot of people who are parents are getting older and older, so it's a sense of, I think that, like I was joking about my own dad, that, my dad adopted me and my brother at the same time, so my dad was kind of stricter with us, but then he adopted another child 12 years later, and he kind of treats my younger brother like a grandchild. And that's kind of what happens to parents as they get older. They learn to be a little bit more giving children whatever they want. They learn to be a little bit more like a grandparent, where a grandparent is more giving to a child and is more patient with a child. It is more like you can do whatever you want and stuff and have fun, because that's kind of more how grandparents like to be. Parents stereotypically are kind of more like rejecting of what a child wants, and more disciplinary and more hard ass and more a bit of a bully to kind of teach a child all those things. So I really think that that's kind of a good metaphor and a point I think they're trying to make, is how children can be kind of distracted with their lives and not see the consequences. And at the end of the day, they don't care about anything about getting, except pulling off the bike parade or getting what they want to make themselves have the best bikes as possible. So the kids are very selfish, but it's also talking about like how people are fueled by their own desires and all that. All right, that's all I got to say about this episode. I think it's very cerebral. It is a part 1 and part 2, so I do think it's a little cliche that they're doing that, because South Park is very good with making cliffhangers, and they did that for the Skank Hunt saga, and they also did that with the season with PC Principal, where they did a bunch of cliffhangers and mystery and all that. So I really think that I think like when they do it next year, they have to kind of get back to originality, or go back to the early seasons, or even like the first season of South Park, where it was episode by episode. They don't need to cross-reference things. They don't need to get into, let's build a climactic cliffhanger before an end or something like that. So I really think that, they have to be a little bit more experimental and maybe bring in more writers or bring in younger people with ideas. But I really think that they're becoming a little formulaic. But otherwise, an okay episode. I like South Park. It's very cerebral. The Simpsons is crap. Family Guy is crap, but South Park always bangs it out of the park.